Thanks so much, Scott, and it's so nice to be talking to you live as opposed to just being in front of a camera. I'd like to talk a little bit about a program that I'm involved in now called Growing Foxes on the Shoulders of Giants. It's a program in London where we are teaching girls at a private girls' school who are in A-level, so they're in their sort of 17. Their entire class of 20 girls at a place called Mount House, which is in Hampstead, private girls' school. They're learning how to think about the future, and it applies as much. I'm fine, but I don't want to. No, you can take it. I'm not wanting to sit down. They are very enthusiastic. We started it in September last year, and it's going to spread to other schools in London. And we've got 1 or 2 schools here signed up. We've just completed a couple of classes at Somerset College in Somerset West, St John's College in Johannesburg, and Durban Girls College in Natal are also doing this course. And we hope to spread it through lots of schools in the future. So I'd like to talk a bit about that because it applies absolutely as much to adults as it does to kids. How to actually look at the future, particularly if you're making investments. And then secondly, I'd like to talk about the global flags and the South African flags, which our clients have come up with as a result of using this model. I guess before I start on the product itself, it's a good thing to explain why people are fascinated about the future. I mean, if you go back to the Bible, but it applies to other religions as well, prophecy was the top profession because, I mean, you know, everybody who was anybody in the ancient days was a prophet, and it applied with Muhammad as much as it applied to prophets in the Old Testament. And I think one of the reasons is this, is that to have an ability to see into the future is quite a rare quality. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to be prophets. I have no special God-given abilities at looking at the future. But what I can do is give you a nice, grounded model at looking at the future. One of the reasons that the future is so fascinating is because it is so unpredictable. And one of the things I always talk about is the butterfly effect, the fact that you can have somewhere in the world a butterfly flapping its wings and it causes a hurricane somewhere else in the world. In other words, the future is non-linear. You can get a very, very small event creating something that is absolutely huge. And if you're good at looking at the future, you can spot that fairly minor event as a flag and then play it into the future. And the one new breed of butterfly that's come about is the viral butterfly, where a fairly small event it didn't go down that way. So yeah, I have to tell you the one example. I was on the board of Anglo, and one of my fellow directors, I was told, had been married to Anne Bancroft when she made The Graduate, which is a very famous movie with Dustin Hoffman. And then somebody said, no, he couldn't have been married to her because she was only married to this. He had hooded eyes, he had a goatee beard, he had sort of very long hair. But he then said to us, can I light up before I talk? So we all thought, gosh, he's going to light a Gauloise cigarette, being French. Instead of which he produced 2 incense sticks, lit them and played them under his nostril, saying, I think more clearly about the future if I'm smelling incense. It's the one and only time the Anglo boardroom has been like a church. And we hired him on the spot. We were so taken with this guy. And we had him for big thing, whereas the fox knows many little things. And it's a very convenient way to divide people in this world, is being a hedgehog or a fox. Hedgehogs are people who have one big idea. They predict a future that is good for their idea. They won't think about anything else. They just go for that one idea. And sometimes they're sensationally successful, particularly if that idea leads to a new invention that becomes popular. Foxes, on the other hand, never bet on a single future, on a single idea. They're constantly looking around at multiple futures, how it can roll, what the opportunities are in those different futures, and then of course they change the probability of the different futures as the present unfolds into the future. So they're constantly weighing up different ideas, and they adapt their strategy as and when they can. They're much more flexible than hedgehogs. And naturally, scenario planners that Pierre talked about being, if you're looking into the future, fall into the fox category. So Chantal Ilbery and I wrote this book, which I'll talk a little bit about later on, called The Mind of a Fox, Scenario Planning in Action, where we just took the metaphor of a fox as the way that we wanted to teach people about scenario planning. The third giant you will have heard of, Charles Darwin. He was a famous botanist, and he came up with a phrase, survival of the fittest. And a lot of people think survival of the fittest means survival of the strongest. It doesn't. It means survival of the species who most fit in with the changes that are taking place in nature around them. And we feel that applies to business, it applies to virtually anything. It's not being the strongest, it's having that ability to adapt as the market changes and realizing how much the market's changing and then adapting. Just as Darwin talked about species adapting to the changes in nature. You've got to have that sort of Darwinian principle of adaptation in order to survive. The next guy is one who made a big contribution to our model, called Karl Popper. He was an Austrian-British philosopher. He mainly concentrated on science, and he basically said in the world there are two types of phenomena. There are clocks, which are those events which can be easily analyzed, just like you can look inside a clock and look at all the mechanisms inside a clock, and you can predict where that clock's hands will be in 24 hours' time, which is exactly where they are today. So clocks are pretty predictable. Clouds, he said, are those kind of events which happen in the world where you have absolutely no idea where they're going in the future. Just like the shape of clouds in the sky. You can't predict where they will be in half an That's why he was put on trial. But it led to a way of thinking called the Socratic method, where when you question any issue, you have no sacred cows. You go back to first principles, you have the principle of debate back or forth, and it's that debate that leads to a higher version of the truth. And when we have conversations in businesses about their future, we try to make sure that everybody in the room is going to say what he or she really feels. There are no sacred cows at all. I must say, I'll give you a You've got your customers, you maybe have government as a regulator, but you've got to consider, if you want to win the game, all the other players in the game. So again, it's not about the future. This is who is that list of present important players in your game. Now we start talking about the future. We say, what are the clockwork flags changing the rules of the game? What are the trends in your particular industry which are changing the rules? And obviously, if it's the investment industry, what are the rules changing the markets in which you're interested? And one that is now talked about constantly when we do work with financial businesses, particularly banks, is cryptocurrencies. And with your subsidiaries as well, you then have to say, what am I going to do about it? And we have a kind of a question that leads to your actions, which is the good old SWOT. What are your strengths and weaknesses right now? And what are the opportunities and threats offered by the future? And then options. What are your strategic options to change the direction of your business in light of the kind of flags that you've raised about the industries that you're in? And what are the tactical options to improve the we published the book with 9/11, we didn't know that it was going to happen in New York and it was going to be planes. We had none of those details. But we thought that the risk of something major happening in America had gone up considerably because we had 3 flags to indicate to us that the probability was increasing. The first was the growing conflict between the major religions of the world, between particularly Christianity, Islam and Judaism, which began in the late 1980s and really intensified during the 1990s. And if you think about it, you know, because suddenly sanctions were reintroduced between Europe and Russia and between America and Russia. And 25% of Europe's energy requirements are supplied by Russia. So it's certainly increased the risk factor, and a lot of European companies have business interests to China, whether you like China or not, in the 21st century. And there is a huge difference because, you know, Brits understand Americans, even if they didn't acknowledge that America had overtaken them. There's still a lot of Brits who feel that they're still number one. But the fact is that America did overtake them. And there are a lot of Americans now who cannot believe that China will overtake them to become the largest economy in the world. And of course, it is a Mandarin-speaking nation, and it thinks very differently to Western democracies. And we're going to have to get used to, our kids and our grandkids are going to have to get used to the idea that the most prominent nation in the world is one that they don't really understand. Interestingly, in 1700, China was the #1 economy in the world. So they're going back to that position for a second time. But it is huge. I mean, it changes everything, that. And I've had people who said, absolute rubbish, America will remain ahead of China. They're more inventive, creative than Chinese. Not so. Chinese are coming up with some huge breakthroughs in science, solar energy and other things, which shows that they're catching up Americans very, very quickly. So that is a huge game changer with that second flag. They've changed the one-child into the two-child policy because they don't want the third flag, which I'll talk about soon, to slow economic growth down. The third element of that red flag is North Korea, because Trump has drawn a line in the sand. He has said that he will never allow North Korea to have the capability of hitting American cities with nuclear weapons. And the CIA have always been 2 years behind North Korea, because North Korea has incredibly smart physicists, nuclear physicists, in fact, as smart as any other nuclear physicists in the world, and they probably will solve the last problem, which is to create a warhead that is resistant to re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere within the next year. And Trump has said, we're not going to allow that. So what is he going to do? Is he going to strike North Korea? First strike on North Korea, because you've got to play that scenario. If you're going to stop somebody doing something, and there's no way, I think, negotiations are going to stop Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans continuing with their nuclear program. You've got to play the scenario of a first strike by America on North Korea. The probability's gone up hugely this year and next year, and of course the disruption to South Korea, because the first thing the North Koreans will do is probably attack Seoul. And then secondly, China itself, where you will have, if it goes nuclear, you can have a lot of radioactive fallout over China. So, as I said, one of the things you try to do population on Earth, and old people don't eat as much. They don't do anything as much. And so, yes, they've got a very old population. It's declining in numbers, but they're fine. They say, please, let it go on, because they've got very low unemployment. They've got a flat economy. They've got declining numbers of people, so income per head is rising. So it's a completely new economic model. And the interesting thing is Europe is moving into exactly the same space, because it's a very fast aging society. In fact, Italy movement, and they don't like the super rich. So what do? They express it in their vote. That's why you got Donald Trump. And that's why you got Brexit. I mean, there was Cameron saying, oh, well, I'll just throw a bone to my right-wingers in my pocket by offering a referendum to leave Europe. Because I know Remainers will win, but it's a nice bone. And he lost. And then based because of the extreme weather patterns that we're seeing around the world. A lot of people think that climate change is just about the gentle warming up of the planet. It's not. It's about how wide the pendulum is swinging on extreme weather conditions. Texas last year had 1 in 500 year rains, two rainfalls which were 1 in 500 years in Houston and places like that. In December in Los Angeles, a whole suburb in northern Los Angeles was wiped out, completely wiped out. It was on the coast, got completely wiped out by the rainfall. They'd had a 4-year drought, and then they had rainfall at the beginning which is inflation rates. When are inflation rates published? Because 2 weeks ago, it was announced that an extra so many thousand jobs have been added in the United States, but that wages had started to really pick up. And that sent the market down 2,000 points. Because everybody knows that if inflation rate rise, interest rates will rise. And we've been in a surreal world of zero interest rates. And in terms of corruption is the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as our president. Because a lot of people thought that he'd only become president at the end of Jacob Zuma's term. Very few people were playing the scenario when he became leader of the ANC that in such a short time he would become leader of the country. But it's happened. And one of the reasons is that people are totally fed up with corruption. The second flag that people raise is around infrastructure, that you cannot have the kind of fast-growing economy that we want. I mean, at the moment, it's still pretty dismal stuff. It's like 1 to 1.5% growth when we should be doing 3 to 5. And you can only have that if you have quality infrastructure. As I said, in China, they worship Deng Xiaoping because of his obsession about infrastructure. In this country, we've got to do lots about our SOEs, the ones that run electricity and other key aspects of infrastructure. We've got to do a lot about education. I know that that isn't put in the same category as ports and bridges and roads, but gee, it is part of our infrastructure, and we have got to start getting our basic education system right. I mean, for me, one of the most ironic things is that Zimbabwe has a better education system than we do. And they don't have the money, but they've managed to keep a real responsibility in education in Zim, and that's why you've got so many smart Zimbabweans here in South Africa. So we've got a lot to do to improve our infrastructure. As one CEO said the other day, in parts of South Africa, you don't drive on the left of the road, you drive on what's left. of the road. So there's plenty that we have to do in order to turn this flag green. The third flag is around leadership, because what we've found is if you want to be a competitive nation, you've got to be fairly united. Not completely united, because that's the way democracy works. You can have different opinions about things, but you've got to be fairly united to be successful as a nation. And you know, we've become incredibly divided since 1994, again, and it really matters. I mean, I look at Manchester United when they were run by Alex Ferguson, who used to sort of heave hair dryers around the changing room at people like David Beckham when they got stroppy. But he kept Manchester United united, and they won every trophy on earth, and they won them dozens of times, and they haven't won it since he's left. So you do need that kind of unifier. So Cyril has made a big point about this in his Sona address. I hope he sticks to it, because you know, the one aspect which really could divide people is around land reform, and he's talked about expropriation without compensation. He did add the riders about not affecting food security and the fact that we were a semi-arid country. Till the end, and then you can ask the question. We've got to look at the Jobs Summit as possibly a way to get this flag discussed. So what are the scenarios? Well, the first is to stay in the Premier League of Nations. There are 60 nations. We've been in the 30s. We've dropped to the 50s with sort of re-ranking as junk status. And so we're in the relegation zone. And if you talked to me a few months ago, I gave a 60% probability of falling from the Premier League into the second division. I do believe with Cyril now in charge that we have a 60% probability of staying. Barack and Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama's become one of his greatest fans and put pressure on him to stay in the United States, but he's back here in South Africa. He started an alternative energy company, and good luck to him. But that is the kind of talent that we have. And, you know, for me, it's just not a coincidence that the #1 entrepreneur, according to Forbes magazine, first place we played was called L'Auberge Notre Dame. It was just opposite the Notre Dame. It was the second best restaurant in Paris. And we used to come on at about 8:30 for an hour. We were called Les Garçons. And a lot of Americans used to come to this restaurant. And they obviously hadn't a clue about French. And so we did a few French songs, and they thought we were French. So they'd say, "Do you know the Yellow Rose of Texas?" And we say, "Oh, oui, the Yellow Rose of Texas." And then we used to sing it with a French accent. And they gave us huge tips. Because, you know, this was French. to a higher figure, because we are still the most sophisticated economy in Africa by far, by far. We became the number one economy in the 1860s with the discovery of diamonds. We held the position when we discovered gold. And as I said last night to John Matham on the radio, this moment is as important as those two previous moments, because we've now got to restructure our economy in a way that leads to a kind of third wave. But it's not going to be based on, I think, new mineral discoveries. It's going to be based on lots of other things. So I certainly wasn't too alarmed by the budget yesterday. In fact, I was quite relieved with quite a few of the principles, because there wasn't anything that I think is going to scare people away from investing in South Africa.
So I said, how can you cut back on education?
Well, I don't think that it's money that is the problem in education. It's the fact that you've got a lot of principals who simply aren't doing the job properly. You've got a lot of teachers who are unaccountable. As I said, Zimbabwe, with far less money, has a better education system. So I actually think, and I know this from my period as chairman of the Anglo-American Chairman's Fund, which gave a lot of money away to schools, was the first person you talked to was the principal of the school. And if he or she could convince you of being a champion, you gave the money. So I want a principal's academy, because I think that you can improve education hugely in this country if you have the right management at school level, and which imposes accountability on the teachers at the school. You only have to look at the good schools in this country to see just how good education can be if you have proper principals and proper school management. We have as good schools as anywhere else in the world. Any other questions? Yeah.
Good day. Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. I would like to know what you think the effect of free tertiary education for people with annual income below 350,000 will be, sort of holistically on the country. So perhaps like institutions, but also specifically, like you mentioned, pockets of excellence, how you think that will affect that, and economic growth and things like that, and inequality.
Okay. I guess I have an unusual view on this, because I originally came from the UK, where tertiary education, even in the days when I was educated, was fairly expensive. And of course it's got far more expensive. And I have quite a few friends who couldn't afford to pay for their kids' education, so they had to take government loans. And right now, if you take an engineering degree in the UK, you end up at the end of your 4-year degree with a loan of £50,000 that you have to repay. And this has a terrible impact
from a poor family and you got credits in your output in those things. So there's a bias in the system for those.
Yeah.
And there's, kind of encouraging, students to get into those because we need them to build manufacturing, whatever technology, IT, and all those things. I think that becomes affordable. Today, it is just a blanket.
Yeah.
If you study anthropology, sociology, psychology, politics, you got free education. Yeah. And to me, it's a problem.
No, but that's a very good point that you make, that maybe you've got to slant the system in terms of accessing these loans, that you're doing subjects which are relevant. You've got to be careful because obviously people must still be free to choose, humanities and stuff like that. But it's not just universities. I mean, I'm very glad that technical colleges in South Africa are going to have a similar deal. Because why is Germany the #1 economy in Europe when it lost the Second World War? And the reason is simple, is that they have a dual education system in Germany, where you have the university academic system, but you also have the technical college system. And the critical thing is nobody looks down on that second system. If you go through it, you've got as good a chance of succeeding in Germany as if you go through the university. And in the UK, that doesn't apply. There's still the snobbish attitude towards universities and did you go to a polytechnic sort of thing. And what I want to see in South Africa is a similar deal, where you choose which avenue you want to go down, and it really makes no difference in terms of the way people perceive you. Okay, one more question?
Yeah, last one. I'll just thank you very much. It was your first time that I've heard you speak, and you were wonderful. But the song, as a creative person, cuts it for me. So thank you for that. A big Bob Dylan fan. I'm going to ask you 3 things. The first one is the whole global politic, and specifically, world countries and the politics behind how they want to enforce power. And how they use, both the system of economy, meaning whatever they adopt to bolster their economy, versus them having power in a global space, and how that's actually influencing growth all over. Like, for example, a dominance game between North Korea and America. How much of it is political, how much of it is nationalist, how much of it is psychological, and how much of it is, at the end of the day, just pure power?
Okay, well, let me just answer this question. Is that in the case of the North Korean issue, it is purely about weaponry. It's not about power. It's the fact that for the very first time, the US is being threatened by somebody they don't really understand. I mean, they obviously feel that Russia isn't a threat because of MAD, mutually assured destruction. more of a talking shop to improve trade, rather than become a politically active body. On the other question of, are we naturally corrupt? Do we have natural vices? And I guess as I get older, I kind of feel, gosh, we're just like the Romans. Said it himself, which is you should be greedy when other people are fearful, and fearful when other people are being greedy, because he used to sell equities when they'd done well. And most people would say, let's hang on because they've done well. He just kept it as a
Applause. Thank you very much.